This is the Allroad. The Allroad suspension is pneumatic. Because of this, there is no relaxed point in the downward travel. If the suspension were springs, the tension would release at a set point in the downward direction. Even though you would experience similar force with a spring setup, the pneumatic strut will have more force pushing downwards. You will need to push the suspension upwards to release the control arm from the steering knuckle. There are two things you can do to push the suspension back up. First is releasing the air from the strut, or use a jack to push it back up. I will choose the latter in these procedures. To reduce the force pushing downwards, place the suspension height at level 1. Place the car in jack mode. This turns off the level control module and prevents air from being added to the system. To invoke jack mode, hold down the up and down buttons simultaneously until the suspension malfunction indicator shows up in the display. Chock the wheels. With the car still on the ground, loosen the axle bolt, but do not take it out. Remove the wheel. Insert 2 of the bolts back into the hub diagonally. This will lock the brake router to the hub, which the axle is connected to. If this is not done, the brakes will not work. Lift the vehicle and support it with jack stands. Locate and remove 6 stripper square bolts that fasten the drive axle to the transmission. Depending on the car, this can be easier said than done. Have someone press and hold the brake pedal. This also works. Loosen 2 bolts at the bottom or the side behind the front wheel. Then release the brakes and rotate to access the others, 2 each time. Your tripper square socket should be no more than a 3/8 drive. Anything larger will not fit. Vehicles with manual transmission access the bolts from the inner side of the subframe using this length extension. The ZF 5HP19 automatic transmission is wider than the manual 01E, so for automatics, you have to access the bolts from outside of the subframe using this length extension. Use a pry bar to pop the axle from its seat. The mark you see here is so that I know which bolt is already torqued to the proper settings. Remove the lower frontward control arm at the ball joint. This is the one with the ball joint pointing downwards. Careful not to damage the ball joint rubber boot. These are expensive. Remove the lower rearward control arm at the ball joint. This one is a bit more difficult. Use this special tool. I have one of these tools, but the opening is not wide enough, so I use a hydraulic separator. This tool requires 2 hands to operate, so this section was not recorded. What I did was keep the nut on the ball joint to prevent the threads from being damaged, then wedge the tool between the axle and the ball joint, and then operate the tool to pop the ball joint out of the knuckle. Place a jack under the lower frontward control arm. Use the jack to force the suspension upwards a bit. Not too much. Remember that you are compressing air. You also don't want to lift the vehicle off the jack stance. Separate the control arms from the steering knuckle. At the same time, loosen the axle bolt a bit. Then push on the bolt to get the axle moving inwards. Grab the outer axle joint and pull it out of the steering knuckle. You can now remove the axle. Installation is the reverse of removal. Use blue thread lock on the axle bolts to prevent them from becoming loose due to vibration. Tighten the inner joint bolts to 70 Newton meters that is 51.6 foot-pounds. Tighten the main axle bolt at the outer end to 190 Newton meters, that is 140.1 foot-pounds.